Okay. Well, hi everyone, and welcome to Fast Fashion and Climate, Unraveling the Environmental Costs. I'm Gabrielle Sierra. I am the Director of Podcasting here at the Council, and I am lucky enough to be presiding over today's discussion. So we're joined today by conference participants attending in person in New York and virtually via Zoom. It is an on-the-record event, as Stacey indicated. This session will serve as the closing plenary of CFR's annual conference on expanding access to international affairs. You know, it's a sunny summer Friday, and we're just really excited for you all to be here. And I think this is going to be just a super interesting conversation. If you need a little wake up, I can just be like, the baby's coming, and then everyone is up. You know what I mean? So just give me a high sign. So I would love to start just by asking why you're here today. This is the Council on Foreign Relations. We are an international think tank. You know, why are we up here discussing fast fashion and climate change? And Ellie, if you want to give us a start.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to see everyone. My name is Ellie Hito. I'm managing director at a fund called General Atlantic, and we launched a climate fund about 4 years ago to focus on growth equity investing in climate-related businesses, so businesses that are driving decarbonization for their customers. It's clearly a global issue, and so for us, half our investments are in the U.S., half are overseas, one's in Africa. Everything we do has some sort of international lens to it. As a firm, that's been true for 30 plus years. And so climate is just the latest opportunity for us to invest behind fast-growing, innovative businesses that operate across the globe.
And I'm Linda Greer. I'm an environmental toxicologist, so I specialize in toxic chemicals that kill you. I worked for an NGO called the Natural Resources Defense Council for much of my career. And when industry globalized and moved abroad, I became an international player because I was following the tons of pollution around the globe. And this sector was the first sector that I focused on in the country of China because of the heavy environmental impact that it has. So I'm an accidental expert in the impacts of fast fashion, and I think it has a lot to offer in terms of really understanding the dynamics of the private sector, developing governments, and the role of our own country and citizens in managing the problems that those things cause.
Corley?
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm Corley Kenna. I'm the Chief Acting Officer at Patagonia. And I'm here because we can't talk enough about these issues, frankly. Clothes are something that we not as many we have in our closet, but we do need clothes. Our planet is in trouble, and we need to understand how these things are related and what we can do about it.
See your mic. I was like, who is it?
I also make
No, I don't. All right, well, while we have the swap out, I just sort of want to run through the issue of fast fashion from your unique perspective. We have three very different people on this stage coming from very different, jobs and purposes. And so you're each approaching this in a very different way. A scientist working for a nonprofit environmental advocacy group, an impact and communications officer for a retailer, and the managing director for a climate growth equity fund. Some of you have investors to please, funds to raise, bottom lines to think about, sales, and even public policy to adhere to. So I wonder, what is your main concern? And I'm asking a big question, which is, what are your limitations in this role? How do you navigate that? Is there a divide, and how do you bridge it?
So when we started, we had a very clear sense of where we thought the opportunity was. So we thought we need growth equity capital, and that's missing in the market. We also had a clear set of things we wouldn't do. We're not very early stage venture investors, so we're not taking binary science bets. We're not making binary regulatory bets. We're also not investing in green premium businesses, which is, I think, something you see a lot in this particular sector.
What does that mean?
Effectively, you're asking your customer to pay more for a product that is cleaner or greener. That has its place in certain areas. I think, broadly speaking, if we're going to achieve decarbonization targets, it's tough to ask humanity to pay more for it. And so how do we enable business models that actually allow people to decarbonize and save money? And I think that's what's relevant to this conversation. For the areas we cover, decarb, energy efficiency, resource conservation, emissions management. I think 3 of them are relevant. The only one that's not relevant is emissions management. But in this sector, there's clearly a decarbonization opportunity, eliminating things like coal from factory usage. There's clearly an opportunity to drive renewable energy into the factories. And then there's an opportunity to think about how do we use materials more effectively, and that can be in the growing process, it can be in the manufacturing process. How do you make the most of the sort of fabrics you're using? It can be in recycling, it can be in new business models, so things like Rent the Runway and Depop, which are innovative ways of recycling, reusing products so that we produce less.
Well, and for myself, you know, in my career, my job was really both as a scientist and as an advocate. Those are really 2 very different hats. As a scientist, my training and my job was to work where it matters the most, not get distracted by things that don't actually matter, not chase after the next glittery thing, but really try to keep an eye on the prize in industrial pollution. And then as an advocate, my job was how can you be effective? You know, it's a very big, complicated world out there. What are the points of leverage that will successfully lower emissions? So it's one thing to know what the problem is, and that takes maybe the scientific background, but another thing to figure out how you're going to make a difference. And when you work for an organization like the Natural Resources Defense Council, that's what they pay us for, not to just understand the issue, but to actually make the difference.
So Patagonia has a really unique ownership model. And for those of you not familiar, a couple of years ago, September 2022, our founder and the family that wholly owns the company decided they wanted to give away the financial value of the company. So as we say, as you ask about shareholders, investors, and so forth, the earth is in fact Patagonia's one and only shareholder. That's how we think of it. The reason that is because when the family decided to give away the financial value of the company, what they did is they put in place a purpose trust that ensures that no matter who's around, so 100 years from now, that the values that we hold dear are still the values, and that's still the charter of the company. We can't become something totally different. The other co-owner of the company is a nonprofit called the Holdfast Collective. The Holdfast Collective receives all the money that's not reinvested into the company. And the idea is for the money that goes into the Holdfast Collective as quickly as it goes in to go out the door, because the planet needs the money now. So it's not meant to kind of bank and collect money, push it out the door. So for us, that shareholder question is pretty unique and different, and that is what guides the work that we do. Our purpose as a company is we're in business to save our home planet. That too is embedded in every hiring decision, every product design decision, every marketing decision. That really guides us. It's not just a marketing slogan or words on the wall. It really does drive how we make decisions at the company.
Well, you know, I'm going to jump around a little bit from what we had discussed, just because it seems like we're talking a little bit about it, but greenwashing. So it sounds like that's obviously not a problem for Patagonia, but you know, how do we know? How insidious is this? How do we know? Well, first of all, what is greenwashing? You know, how prevalent is it, and how do we sort of tackle that misinformation?
Glad to start, and then maybe Linda, you want to?
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So greenwashing is happening everywhere. It is prevalent. It is, and I would say even Patagonia is guilty of greenwashing. Greenwashing is when you are saying you're doing something green for the planet, but it's really empty calories, right? It's just slogans. So think about the word sustainable. More recently, regenerative has become this sort of empty word that is being used as marketing for companies who are saying they're doing something good, but aren't actually going after it. One way to kind of look out for greenwashing is, are there explanations behind some of these adjectives that companies are using? If you go to their website, can you find deep storytelling about their supply chain? Have they mapped it? All of that. So it is a problem. It is something we try to work on every day, every story that we put out. I think one way for customers to know what companies are actually doing things to protect the planet versus those that are just talking about ways to protect the planet is to look for certified B Corps. Because if you're a certified benefit corporation, that means that you go through a pretty rigorous certification process, hundreds of questions about how your business is run. And if you get certified, an outside body of experts has decided your company is in business to both be profitable, in service of people, and in service of our planet.
So, the problem of greenwashing sort of backs me into the overall issue of voluntary corporate responsibility, which is the ride we've been taking for more than a decade to try to reduce emissions and impact around the world, in large part because we don't have a global governance system that's going to require companies to do something. So we have relied on this, and there have been a number of very big initiatives. The Science-Based Target Initiative is the first one that jumps to mind, where companies embarked upon the process of making very ambitious, I would even say sometimes preposterous, pledges of what they were going to do to align themselves with Paris levels of reductions, et cetera. And greenwashing is sort of eating us alive, because what's ended up happening is that so many of these goals and commitments have become PR talking points, and companies have had to sort of, as companies, face the music that, oh man, this is actually very difficult, very hard, so much easier to kind of wrap it up with a bow on top and talk about what we really want to be doing, what we really hope we're doing, and take advantage of the lack of crisp definitions and third-party certifications of terminology. So greenwashing is not just aggravating to Linda Greer as she goes shopping every week, which it is, but it's also cast a terrible shadow over our ability to hold companies kind of responsible for their actions, because it's working. The greenwashing is working. I brought my list for you. Take out the pen. Just a few words. All natural, recyclable, biodegradable, eco-friendly.
These are the no-no words.
Yes.
Okay.
Conscious collection, natural, ethically made, etc. So, the words are everywhere, but trust me, they mean nothing, and they're very deceptive to consumers who are trying to make the right decisions, and they're keeping environmental professionals from holding the feet to the fire of the corporations who have made very important commitments, but are not being held to that level of accountability.
It's certainly something we think about in our world, and I think we'll acknowledge that it happens in the world broadly. For us, we've made a couple commitments to our LPs, our investors, that we're going to find growth equity investments and deliver them a return, and those companies will have a very positive climate impact, i.e. a reduction in greenhouse gas. And we knew that there are real consequences to making those commitments in terms of obligations. And so what we've done is we've engaged a third party, as Linda mentioned, to assess what we're doing from the very beginning, before we make an investment, while we're monitoring and managing the investment, when we exit it. And so we can't do anything that they haven't signed off on as being in line with science-based targets. And so it's definitely it's been top of mind for us from the very beginning. And I think it's a particular consequence to financial services firms because of the obligations we have to investors and regulators and the like.
Right.
Linda, I wonder if you found that, especially more recently in this current climate, people have sort of been backing away from corporate responsibility, pledges to go green, anything along those lines?
Yeah, I think many of you have probably read about this in newspapers as well, or in social media, where just the whole ESG has become sort of a bad word. It's been something, keep your head down, don't talk about it, et cetera, et cetera. And I have already noticed, and I fear it will be magnifying going forward, that companies that used to be really taking a bow for some of the things that they were doing are now not only not talking about it, but backing away from it. And it does go to the heart of the weak read that voluntary corporate responsibility is, right? Because it's voluntary, and if it goes out of fashion, not just in the fashion industry, but in any industry, then it goes away. It's not something that is required by statute. And I'm somebody who spent about 15 years, the last 15 of my years of my career, working hard on voluntary corporate initiatives. So I come to this conclusion, sadly and honestly, that it did not work. And now we're in a more, with very notable exceptions, and I'm not just saying that because Patagonia is really, it shows what it could be if it did work. But I think especially in today's atmosphere, we really can't count on it, and I think it will see further backsliding on this type of initiative, leaving us with, I think, the question of like, okay, well, now what do we do? Because I think that the gig is up on this one now, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'll just add, I couldn't agree more. Voluntary requirements around these issues are wholly insufficient. They're also really problematic because you have companies approaching it 100 different ways.
Right.
There's no set standard. It's just messy and problematic, but also everything Linda said. I think in some good news, not trying to greenwash here, because it's a tough time, I think, for this particular issue, especially in our industry. But in some good news, governments in Europe are demanding more of companies. And so if you are a US brand that has significant operations across Europe, you are likely to have to be in a place where you are starting to at least map your supply chain, disclose your emissions, have plans, things like this. And so a lot of the bigger brands in the US do have operations in Europe. And so even if the US government is walking away from these commitments as a business, it is more prudent to stay ahead of where that regulation is coming from. In this case, it just happens to not be from the US government. There's also, if you're a company that operates in many states, in California, where Patagonia and I are based, the governor has imposed more stringent climate measures. So we're not going to do something just for California. We operate and we have stores across the country. So that means we are going to sort of align to those regulations coming out of Europe. In the US right now, that's mostly in California, and try to keep pace that way.
Yeah, just to add one other note of optimism along those lines is there's a very interesting piece of legislation that was introduced both in the state of New York and also in the state of California called something like the Environmental Accountability Act. And the idea behind it is that even any kind of company just operating and selling clothing here in the United States needs to take certain responsibilities for understanding and reporting on their supply chain, for baselining their emissions, for making reduction commitments, and putting that into law as opposed to voluntary. It's been very interesting that some companies that have these very high commitments, for what they're going to do voluntarily, are actually opposing being required to do that. So what else do I have to tell you? But nonetheless, it's very interesting sort of idea, and we have a long history of the state of California doing things like for the car industry that then really changed what happened across the whole country. So I do see that as a possible a promising idea for what are we going to do about these inconsistencies across states and the step back federally in the United States and the fact that we have these global operations. So keep your eye on that one, because I think that's got some interesting possibilities.
The New York Fashion Act and the California Fashion Act.
Thank you.
Yeah, it is. Those are good ones to advocate for, too, if you're in New York or California. Tell your governors to pass it.
There you go. So, you've sort of touched on this. I want to talk about individual responsibility. So if you asked me, I would say I care deeply about the climate. I also care that next weekend I have another wedding to go to. And if the people see me in the same outfit from the other wedding I went to, then that would be like super embarrassing. And so, I'm tempted to buy a new dress. I'm tempted to, buy a new shirt. So I just wonder, does that really matter? Does it matter the choice that I make? What is my individual responsibility here? I mean, Linda's list of words are so helpful, but like, is it really up to me to make that decision? Does it make a difference?
I'll start, but it does make a difference, and you might consider thrifting, Real, Poshmark, all great places to buy gently worn items. I'm going to screw this up, but if you keep we call it gear because we make stuff for outside, but if you keep your clothes, your dresses, your gear in use for an extra 9 months, you're saving about 30% of water. You're cutting carbon emissions by 30%. It just has a lot of savings. That's just
Wow.
9 months
Yeah.
keeping it in use that much longer. So it does make a difference. However, it is not just up to the individual consumer. We should all make smart choices in our daily lives. It does matter. Brands need to take more accountability for the products they put out into the world. 85% of apparel that's ever been put out in the world has never, is still out in the world. This is why you see these pictures of clothes just piling up everywhere. We don't have good end-of-life solutions. So another way to look out for sort of brands that are not greenwashing is what brands are offering solutions for resale, repair, things like that. Any item that you buy for Patagonia, I'm sorry I'm sounding so much like a commercial. I'm normally not like this, but we will fix for free. So my parents' dog made a big hole in one of my puffy jackets, and we will fix that for free. Zipper breaks, we fix that for free for the entirety of its lifetime. And when you are done with that product, we will buy it back from you. These are ways that you can kind of responsibly, we as a brand can act more responsibly, and you as a consumer can act more.
Yeah, so that is a super helpful sort of frame of it's not just about the consumer, it's also about the brand, et cetera. Let me also kind of reframe a little bit, which is, there's two ways to really think about yourself. One is as a consumer and the other is as a citizen, by which I do not mean a U.S. citizen, I mean as a member of society that you live in. And the thing is, first of all, as a consumer, it's not easy being green, right? We were just talking about how do you make the right decisions, et cetera, et cetera. But the limitation for me is, as a consumer, you're just looking out for yourself and your family. There are a million things for sale that shouldn't even be for sale because of the environmental damage that they cause. It is of no concern for you if you don't personally buy it and you don't care and you're just out for number one over there. And that's not moving the needle very much. I really don't think it's moving the needle very much. We've seen over and over again that even if consumers tell us they care, they don't buy it if it costs a little bit more, and some of them can't afford to buy it if it costs a little more. So even if I liked the idea, which I don't actually love the idea, it's not going to do the trick. We've already seen that. So then let's pivot for a minute of thinking of yourself more as a citizen or as a member of society that needs to see change, and taking that energy and pressuring both of the corporations and your leaders, your political leaders, to actually create laws and regulations so that you don't have to make these decisions as a consumer anymore, because you can feel sure that the things that are on the shelves actually deserve to be on the shelves and have minimized environmental harm. So a mindset shift of what can a consumer do to, I'm not just a consumer, I'm also a member of society, I also vote, I also have people that should be accountable to me, is where I'd like to kind of have you think more broadly about yourself and about the effect. Because as you've already heard us brushing up against, I really think at the end of the day, the solution is going to be there in that kind of system change and not so much in individual consumer purchasing decisions.
So there are a number of data points around how much more petroleum gets consumed in the U.S. versus in other countries, how much more energy we use, et cetera. And so it's clear that there are certain societies that are more energy intensive and therefore have more emissions. I don't want to tell people what to do and how to live their life. I think the focus that we find to be really interesting is that if we're able to drive more efficiency into the economy, it reduces emissions. And so what we would rather do is create the incentives for consumers to make choices that have a lower emissions impact. Create the opportunity for businesses to reduce emissions in their operations, to offer consumers products that have a lesser emissions impact, a lesser waste impact, lesser usage of certain materials. And so that opportunity actually exists in scale across the economy, across the world. And so the real exciting challenge for us is that we are driving businesses that really should have global potential and have an opportunity to make an impact in a way that is economically attractive. And I think that's the thing that needs to be true to scale. I don't know that we get there by waving our finger at folks to do things one way or another. And then we also have to realize that in the rest of the world, people's living standards are increasing, which by definition means that their emissions profile is increasing. And so we have to find, and we can't tell those folks, no, you can't have X. I think we have to find a way to make the products and services that people are choosing to buy less impactful.
So carrots over sticks.
In this case, yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah, I mean, that bridges into the question I was going to ask, which is, when voters go to, vote, they're looking at this number one topic, which is the economy. It's not climate change. It's not what people are bringing as their number one concern. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit more to just getting people to that point and how maybe, what you're saying, Ellie, is, actually incorporating one into the other.
Yeah. Well, so I think one of the things that we are not focused on today, at least in the US, if we don't build enough power over the next 5 years, power prices will go up. They have gone up in the past year, and they will continue to go up. We're using more for data centers. We're driving more manufacturing here. We're electrifying various elements of our society. The only way for us to actually add the power we need is via renewables and batteries. And so if we need 200 gigawatts over the next 5 years, 80% of that is going to be renewables. And so I think there's a great opportunity to tell the story that in order to fulfill our goals and our desires around economic growth, economic activity, we have to use renewables. And by the way, they are now cheaper. I think that's been the most exciting development over the last decade is solar is down by 90%, batteries are down by 90% in terms of cost. Wind is down during that time frame as well. That is, I think, the license to scale those technologies. And that message may not be reaching consumers, but I think the companies that are making decisions around where they get their power from are taking advantage of that. And we see that in the US, we see it in India, we see it in China, we see it in South America. People are really focused on leveraging these technologies to reduce their costs, which I think is great for society as a whole because it reduces how much people are spending on energy.
Anything to?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about how voters think about climate. And Yale does a lot of good polling on this and recently released a study that 73% of Americans believe climate change is happening and 63% believe it's a real problem. So, we are past the days of this isn't on people's minds, people aren't concerned. The majority of Americans, both parties, believe this is an issue. I think where it gets a little complicated is how much we talk about this issue because it's become somewhat of a polarizing issue, especially at a federal level. And it's become really political. And so we don't talk about it enough. And so I think one thing, again, that all of us can do is just talk about climate change more. I think if we did that, we would tend to think about it when we go to cast our ballots. We would also be more inclined to find solutions. And I think you can think about other issues that have come up lately. One political party or another brings that issue up enough, even if it's not, frankly, a real issue or a real problem, but people become pretty fixated on it, and that then yields some solutions. So with climate, I think it's on us as individuals, brands, government, everybody in between to be talking about this issue more so that we can get it out there and make it more front of mind. One reason, though, that on this specific question, that Patagonia has been in the business of encouraging our community to vote with the planet in mind on election day, and we've been doing this for, I mean, I think we're a 52-year-old company. I think we've been doing this for 50 years. Is because we do need more people who go into the ballot box and understand the record of the environmental record of the candidates running in their area. And I will say at the local level, that this is a long-term play for us, 50 years in, and we still got a lot of work to do. But at the local level, we're seeing this work, and people do vote on these issues locally more so than at the federal level. But I think this will change.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add to these two answers. I think they were both kind of covered the landscape. I guess what I would say, just to maybe double up on what you had said, Ellie, is, you know, I think we really we're already at the point where the economy versus climate concerns are not at each other's, you know, they're not in tension. As a matter of fact, the cost of the impacts of climate change, whether you want to talk about that as climate change per se or just what this is costing us, are becoming enormous and impossible to ignore. And then also the business opportunities of renewable energies and batteries, et cetera, is the exciting stuff of the future. And even in this very difficult political environment of the moment, we are seeing states that have initiatives going on that came from the Biden administration funding, but as a matter of fact, are very important to the economy of the state. You know, it's not about climate change, it's about economic development in that state. So I think an optimistic, I mean, it's kind of, is this optimistic or pessimistic? I'm not sure. But, you know, if you want to just talk about it in economic terms and forget about it as a matter of principle, do we care about planet Earth, and et cetera, I think we're at the point where it's clear which way we need to move forward. And it's just a little bit, it needs to be framed up a little bit differently, but it feels almost inevitable to me that we're going to have to do something about that. And I'll just mention one other thing, which is I did a lot of the work that I did at NRDC was on supply chain work. So pressuring multinationals based here to take more responsibility for factories and their supply chains. And what I picked up on that is, you know, how important, critically important, functional supply chains are to businesses, and the need for redundancy in your supply chain so that if something screws up in one place, you can still get, you know, all of your product to the store when you want it at another place. Just absolutely critical to business success. And that whether they like to talk about it this way or not, that the climate impacts have become huge in identifying where they need supply chain redundancy. You know, you don't want redundancy everywhere because suddenly you have too many factories, but you need it in those critical places. That's an example of like a business thinking. It's not about climate at all, but I think it reflects the way that this could start to spin out compared to disagreeing on the principle of whether we care about climate change.
And I can give you an example. There's one very large footwear manufacturer that exists in the Pacific Northwest. They are a customer of one of our software businesses. The business is a supply chain management company, so they help companies get the right product to the right place at the right time and reduce waste. One of our biggest customers, you know, sort of north of tens of millions of dollars revenue, and we're helping them eliminate billions of dollars of waste and excess production in their supply chain. And so what started as a supply chain opportunity also is a climate opportunity.
Sounds like we could do a whole other event just on supply chains, or even a whole other conference. I am going to actually be quiet and switch over to all of you. I'm sure you have a million questions. Just a reminder that this event is on the record. If you're asking a question in the room or even virtually, please say your name and where you are coming from. If you have a specific question for someone up here, feel free to indicate. Otherwise, you know, we'll field as we go, and we'll start in New York. Yeah.
Hi there, thank you. Jade with the International Youth Leadership Institute. Aside from the professional things, I also sew. I love design. And so as I'm thinking about being a responsible consumer, but also responsible producer of things, like sometimes I sew and people are like, oh my gosh, where do I get that? I'm just kind of like, I don't want to be in front of a sewing machine all day, right? So then that becomes conversations about manufacturing. So I'd like to know if you have advice for ways to, like, am I thinking of like, destroying the environment by thinking of wanting to share more of the art that I would create? Like, how would you advise a person to think about it, even while keeping in mind, as you said, that statistic that 80% of the fashions that are made are already still out here? Like, do you have advice on being responsible in producing?
Yeah, I mean, I would say probably aside from buying secondhand clothes, the best thing you can do is to make your own clothes, especially out of materials that you don't need anymore. Recently held a yard sale with some of my friends, and the first item to go was something that my friends thought I would never sell, which were bridesmaids dresses that were 20, 30 years old. But they were sold to this woman whose daughter was a seamstress and just wanted more materials to make new clothes out of them. So it's a great way to sort of take individual responsibility for your carbon footprint, the planet, and also just clean out your closet with old materials and create something new.
Yeah, and I would just really encourage you, there's tremendous opportunity in better manufacturing that is really under discussed and underestimated. So it's not even just recycled content, but just the cleaner production going into those things. There is a hunger in many consumers to find those sorts of things. I know how hard it is for you to even learn what you need to know in order to decide what you want to buy. But I would encourage you to do that because, yes, we buy too much stuff, but it's just like a little multiplication, right? It's the impact of the stuff times the amount of stuff. If you've got the impact of the stuff way down, then the total, multiplication is lower. So it is very difficult. But I'll just leave you with this little quote that was actually from a fashion model named Angela Lindvall on another panel with me, who said, fashion isn't just about how you look, but it is also how you feel. And that people will feel much better if they can really appreciate the narrative of what went into your journey of discovery, et cetera, et cetera. So I would say keep it up, even though it is very difficult.
Anything virtual or in the room? Okay, great. Yeah.
My name's Josh Davis. I'm a recent graduate from Georgetown University's Master's in Conflict Resolution. And so the question that I wanted to ask is, how do the tariffs, specifically the ones that are targeting the low price, that under $800 threshold imports, matter for this issue, just removing that consumer market?
You
Share a
can go
little bit.
first.
Does anyone
Yeah.
want to speak to tariffs?
Yeah. So the biggest problem with tariffs, at least for Patagonia right now, is not the tariffs, it's the uncertainty. And so I just want to say that at the top. The tariffs are a problem, but the uncertainty, the back and forth, that's the bigger problem for us as a business. Linda spoke about supply chains and diversification. This is yet another reason why you want to make sure that your supply chain is not reliant on just one country. We got out of China, manufacturing in China, probably 5 years ago. And so that's been a big help through this. But we're not immune to the other tariffs that are being imposed. And frankly, they're being imposed in countries that we were told to go do business in because we shouldn't be in China. So there's some weird tensions there too. But at this point, we don't intend to raise prices for our consumers for this year. This could change, right? But like we're trying to offer some predictability at least for our customers and our community. So we were able to do that for this year. But that uncertainty is real. And you see it not just in our industry, of course, too, but across the board.
Any other tariff wisdom?
The tariffs don't touch us in the under $800 category that you mentioned. Where it does is, if we're trying to build battery parks, if we're trying to build more solar and wind, the tariffs are clearly making those renewable projects less economic, which I think is not the outcome we want to have.
Well, and I'll just mention the de minimis tariffs on the 800 and less really directly affect two big fast fashion companies. One is Temu and one is Shein. And they have really completely accelerated what is even fast fashion, right? I mean, they make H&M look like, it's just like, I don't know. So it really, it just took off into a whole new realm. And I think that if the rug gets pulled out from under them, that will somewhat slow down fast fashion, but still not to a point where we can breathe a big sigh of relief. But and they don't make just clothing either. Temu in particular makes a lot of other things. So yeah, I think that's where we really see the impact on fast fashion per se as a possibility.
Thank you. Earl Carr, representing CJPA Global Advisors. We're an international consulting firm, and we are raising capital for a solar project in Jamaica. Gabrielle, thank you for a fascinating discussion along with all the participants. My question is for Eli. When you look at raising capital for renewable energy technologies, how do you convince companies to continue to invest in renewable energy technologies when they could potentially invest in more lucrative industries such as AI? How do you keep them focused on renewable energy?
Companies meaning LPs. I think there is a compelling industrial story to tell about decarbonization. AI is clearly an opportunity, and it will command a fair amount of capital, but that's not the only thing the world has capital for. If you think about the number of jobs that have been created in and around the solar, wind, battery, EV supply chain, it's enormous. If you think about the cost savings for consumers that derives from all of those things, it's enormous. So there is a big economic opportunity that people will not want to leave behind. I don't think anyone's going to ever allocate 100% of their capital to just one thing. If you did that in the first .com boom, you would have had a problem. And so I think people reasonably realize that you want to have a portfolio of opportunities that you invest in, and AI is clearly going to be one. Healthcare is clearly going to be another. And climate, we think, is the most compelling industrial opportunity in the world, and AI is a close second.
Hi, I'm Emma. I'm from Virginia Commonwealth University for undergrad. My question is for all of you, and it's about the labor aspect of everything. Whenever I hear talks of fast fashion, I always hear Patagonia come up as a very good name for sustainability and for the ethical parts of it as well. But they're also just clothes that it's kind of impossible for it to be entirely ethical. Like machines cannot crochet, but factories do also need people to crochet. How do you balance the line between a healthy labor and also healthy pricing, where it's not insanely expensive, but also you're not overworking people and abusing them in a labor situation?
Thank you for that question. And it's a really important issue and a really complicated issue, much like on the environmental front, because we don't own our factories. Therefore, the people who work in them are not Patagonia employees. But just like the environmental footprint that we leave behind is our responsibility, so are the workers who make our products. The most important initiative that we have at Patagonia is working with fair trade, is having fair trade certified factories. And I will also acknowledge it has been really frustrating to get other brands to join us on this journey. And for those of you not familiar with fair trade certification, the way it works is we will pay and work with the factory to certify them. So we take on that upfront cost as a business, work with them to ensure the practices are in place that enable it to be certified. So things like overtime, regular wages, working conditions, the temperature of the place, all of that. And then once it's certified, then we pay a premium on each garment that is made that goes directly back to the workers. So in our time of certifying factories and having these products available to our customers, which has been, I think, over the past 10 years or so, over 100,000 workers around the world have benefited just from Patagonia's commitment to this. We now have 98% of our products are also fair trade certified, which is pretty amazing. What's not amazing is all these factories where these other brands, we've done this hard work to get them certified. They're not yet participating in the program. Because think about how much bigger those numbers would be if other brands who are in our same factory were willing to pay that premium to go back to the workers. But it's a big issue. And yeah.
And the only thing I could add to that is it raises the fundamental relationship between most brands and their suppliers, which is very extremely transactional. So it's one order at a time. You know, there's just not a continuing deep relationship. So one of the frustrations on both the labor side and the environmental side is that most brands don't have as a qualification, let's say, you know, fair wages or good working conditions or meeting environmental standards or anything else. The qualifications for the next order is usually just price and quality. And if you don't meet that, then they're off to the next supplier. Patagonia is very unusual because in part, well, the company's ethics, but also in part, you know, there's very specialized fabrics that Patagonia is known for. That's, you know, and so you just can't get that in any old factory. And it encourages these deeper long-term relationships with your suppliers. But what we see in many, many companies, with a lot of outdoor brands as the exception to the rule, again, because of the functionality requirements for the fabrics, but what we see for most brands is this very transactional relationship, here today, gone tomorrow. You can't really blame the supplier for not wanting to make progressive changes if they know that by the next orders, you won't even be there. You know, you really can't blame them. So it's a very weak hinge there between what we're trying to get to see happen and that business relationship being one of the drivers. Very frustrating on both environment and labor.
We don't specifically have any companies in our portfolio that employ workers in factories like this. But what we have done, we've established ourselves as what's called an Article 9 fund. And so it means that we've made some commitments to our LPs around ensuring that we do diligence on the companies we do invest in, make sure that there's a positive climate benefit, make sure that their governance is up to certain standards, and to make sure that they're dealing with their employees in certain ways. So that's the mechanism by which we then sort of vet the ways in which our companies sort of manage their employees, but we don't have the specific issue that you've addressed.
Hi, my name is Felicia Mitty. I am with USAID up until July. And as I'm going through all the changes, I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to do this pivot into this new career. And I'm actually, one of the areas is sustainable fashion. And so I'm curious to understand and kind of get your perspective on alternative textiles as a way to kind of help in the sustainable fashion industry or sector. I know that there you can use pineapple leaves as a way to develop and change into fiber. You can also use banana leaves. I just recently came back from Mozambique. We use sisal, and that's how I kind of got the understanding of how that could be used for the apparel industry, also in export. And with that aspect as well, there is then economic development opportunities for the farmers that are doing and engaging in the trade, and then you can also have environmental benefits. So I'm curious to know, as I'm talking to people in the space, I hear that there is a lack of funding, mobilizing fundraising efforts to get those businesses off the ground and kind of meet the level and the scale for the international scale for fashion. So I want to understand from your perspective, is this an opportunity where this innovation can bring in, and as well as kind of create a whole system change within the whole circular economy? And is there an opportunity where it can meet the level of demand and supply to make it happen and reach the goals?
Yeah, so we've looked at a number of new materials, and I think that the challenge, we hope that these companies get to scale, they prove the technology, and they find the market adoption. Our mandate is very specific, and so we only really get involved when they have reached a certain level of scale. And I think the challenge that a number of them have, there's two challenges that we've seen. One is just sort of proving the manufacturing and getting the product to have the quality attributes that folks like Patagonia need. and proving they can manufacture it sort of in large quantities consistently over time. And so if you can find a business that has solved that, that is a great first step. The second is, how do you actually get the brands to adopt and pay for? And often there is a green premium, and that has been a stumbling block. Ideally, they get to a place where there is sort of parity of either direct costs, or there's parity when you think about sort of the total cost of ownership. Maybe there's less waste, there's more portability, there's less degradation, that sort of thing. And so those are some of the things I would say you should look for in those opportunities. But recognize that it is still a very early market, at least as far as we've seen.
I'll give you one example at Patagonia, and where I think there is some opportunity is taking waste and turning it into a material that's usable. So we pioneered this in 1993 with plastic bottles and turning plastic bottles into a jacket. Nobody had ever done that before. Revolutionary. Now lots of brands are doing it, which is great. More recently, we partnered with a small startup called Borreo. They happen to be based near us in Central California. And they take fishing nets out of the ocean, send them to Vietnam, and there they get turned into all different kinds of fabrics for us now. So we have many of our best-selling items are now made from these discarded fishing nets and other ocean plastic that has been turned into a new material. This is a good news story, unlike my fair trade one, in that this is now becoming widely adopted. It was only us for a while. Recently, Nike has joined us with Borreo. So really big brands realizing the potential here. And it's exciting because I think we can find something to do with all this waste that is usable. And as Linda said, like the fabrics we make need to be highly durable, highly technical. You're depending on your survival that they're going to keep you warm or whatever it is. If you can do it for that, think of the other uses you could do for less technical use cases.
In the back? Yep, you. I love the look around.
I know,
Is it me?
There was more back there. Hi, my name is Eric Zuleger. I'm a sort of mid-career journalist turned now finishing up my master's in national security with the Rand School of Public Policy. The question I have is incentives and moats for anybody who is potentially going to do a fashion startup. You guys, especially Patagonia, sets a really high bar for entry. If somebody says, well, we want to be a B Corp also, and we also want to have fair trade factories, that's a really high bar to meet just to get your first products made and out the door. So how do you guys think about making sure that the high standards that you're setting aren't actually moats for entry?
Yeah, great question. One, I can tell you that if you're starting a company, it's so much easier to start as a B Corp than try to work that in a lot later. So reverse is actually true on that. You put the practices in place early on, they're a lot easier to scale later. I think our attitude on some of this has changed pretty dramatically, maybe over the past 5 years, which is we used to see a lot of the work that we do in this space to develop new materials, to clean up our supply chain and so forth as a competitive advantage. And so we were okay for a while being the leader and that nobody else was with us. Now we see it sort of the opposite. If we do work and we're the only ones doing it, it's not successful. So we are very intentionally approaching these journeys in a way that make it easier for other companies to come with us. So I was saying with Ellie before this started, one thing that we're piloting right now is a project to decarbonize one factory. So start real small, but the point of starting small is so that we can do it in a way that other companies can join us. And this is what it's going to take because, yeah, if only Patagonia is doing it, we're not making a dent. Okay. Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Good afternoon. So I'm Carmen Rodriguez. I'm here representing ICAP, but I'm consulting with ICAP, but I also am the majority partner for Caravella Consulting. So we help international brands, particularly in manufacturing and biotech, enter the US market. Right now, we're representing a high luxury coat manufacturer in Portugal and also an older shoe market, someone that's trying to enter the US market with shoes and with this high-end coat. So we're doing a whole lot of research attempting to help them enter the market. But I'm not quite sure how to make that in a way where it's sustainable and where I'm being responsible and I don't enter into, an area where it might be the wrong approach or the wrong company. I just want to make sure that I affiliate myself with the right people. And because I'm new to it, I'm not 100% sure how to do it. So what would be your recommendation?
I mean, this is going to sound a little too simplistic than probably what you need, but our founder, his way of responding to this is you can never ask enough questions. And I think there's a lot of truth to it. And again, it's maybe a simple answer, but ask as many questions. There's a lot of resources for this kind of thing. And I know at Patagonia, we're always glad to kind of help with here are the things you want to look for. Linda talked about relationships with suppliers, like all the certifications and programs that we have and all of that. Actually, I think the number one thing that's most important that we do to ensure we have a responsible supply chain is ensure that we have this long-term relationship with our manufacturing partners. Like people don't talk about that as much as they talk about decarbonization and chemicals and stuff like that. But that's one. So the companies that you're working with, what are the things you could dig into to understand how long have they been in business? How long are their relationships with suppliers? What kinds of certifications do they look for? Things like that. But I don't know. Y'all might have a better answer.
And the only thing I would add to that list is if you could look at their supplier scorecard, what are they looking for in their supplier? If it is only how much does it cost, how much does it cost, and how much does it cost, that tells you something. And they usually have scorecards. So what does the scorecard look like? And then how do they make sure that the integrity of the answer? You could also talk to the supplier themselves to see what they have to say. I think that would be enlightening. But I agree. Question.
Okay, well, we could try to fit one more before I get yelled at.
It better be a good one.
And
Pressure's
it better
on.
be a good one. Yeah.
My name is Wagaya Johannes, and I'm from Brooklyn, New York. And my question, I guess, is the last question, is in 10 years' time, what does success look like if you reflect back on the last 10 to 20 years of fast fashion and the industries and the systems changes that have been coming in 10 years? What does it look like?
Ooh, perfect wrap-up question. Yeah.
So I think there's a massive opportunity to decarbonize the production of fashion, not just fast fashion. So how do we drive renewables throughout? And I think, take an example of India or Vietnam, where the government has said, we want to decarbonize, we want to drive renewable power into our energy sector, and companies are adopting it, and they've created a framework for that. So how do you take 50% of the emissions out in ways that are actually cost effective? I think if we haven't done that, it's been a missed economic opportunity.
Yeah, my vision is a tag that says zero carbon garment, all right? And that the way that was achieved was through a lot of electrification, and that electricity came from renewable sources. It is imaginable, and it's not way out there. It starts also with energy efficiency so that you've reduced how much you need, but then the rest of the energy that you need could come from renewables. I think that is within a 10-year horizon if we've got the right incentives and disincentives to get us there.
Yeah, well, plus one to both of those answers, and I agree. I think it's achievable. It would be my hope that that this issue is not this climate, but other environmental issues are not polarizing. That we can approach them in settings and we can disagree on what some of the solutions are, but we can agree that these are problems. That we have customers demanding brands and their leaders to do something about this problem. So success in 10 years will be that that's the case.
Well, thank you, Ellie, Linda, Corley, for joining us. Big thank you. I don't know if you guys realize, but these take a lot of work in our amazing meetings, events, facilities teams. They really just do an amazing job at it. So I want to thank them as well. And thank you all.